And welcome everyone. I'm Marcia Henry with Clearinghouse Review, and on behalf of our Clearinghouse Review editorial team, I'm glad you all could join us today for this webinar. As the foreclosure crisis continues to decimate communities, I think we probably all agree that nobody has found the silver bullet for resolving the problem, but there's some really interesting and creative work going on around the country. And today we have two lawyer organizer teams who are doing some of that work. From Philadelphia, Irwin Ian from Philadelphia Legal Assistance and Ian Phillips from Pennsylvania Acorn. And from Los Angeles, Antonio Hicks from Neighborhood Legal Services of Los Angeles County, and Carlotta Garcia from One LA. Each of them in turn will describe some of the work that they're doing and the synergy that they've found from the combination of legal advocacy and community organizing approaches. We've had a great expression of interest. We had people register from nearly 40 states, so clearly there is a lot of interest in getting a handle on how to address this. First, if you have any technical difficulties, there's a phone number in the chat box. You could call Linda Jordan, who's standing by to try to help out. She makes no promises, but she'll try. If you have problems, you can get her at 312-368-5231. And Michelle, do you want to either launch the slides or turn the control over to me? I'm actually not. Do I have it?
I thought I just gave it to you, Marcia.
Okay, because I didn't get a box about accepting control. Do you want to just run our slides?
Here.
Oh, there, you've been made my present. Okay. Sorry, everybody. Hang on just one second. I did, before we turn it over to the panelists, I did want to just give people a little bit of information about Clearinghouse Review. For those of you who might not be familiar with the publication, it began publishing in 1967, so we're now in our 43rd year. It comes out bi-monthly, both in print and online. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Because I didn't, oh, there we go. There we go, okay. The Clearinghouse Review is published by the Sargent Shriver National Center on Poverty Law in Chicago, and we cover all the various poverty law issues from a national perspective. We have been doing quite a bit to try to make foreclosure resources available to people. Just in 2009, we have several articles. You see them here, and these will be available on the webinar website later. If you want to download them, you can go there. We also have there on our website the archive of a webinar we did last fall if you want to take a look at that. We would like to get a quick sense of the audience. Did you launch the polling question? Whether your office or program subscribes to Clearinghouse Review. Is that, let's see.
Still voting, Marcia.
Oh, okay, because I'm not seeing it. Okay.
Okay, here are your results. 55% yes, 24% no, and 21% I'm not sure.
Okay, that's useful to know. And one more question. Clearinghouse Review is subscription-based, but in the last year, we've adopted a new policy of making individual articles available for sale online, and we've been trying to get the word out about that. We're curious to know whether people are aware of that you can buy individual articles online. If you could just answer that.
And the results on that poll are 32% yes and 68% no.
Okay, well, those 68%, now you know that. And finally, I just want to, do I have, there we go. If you want any more information about the Shriver Center or Clearinghouse Review or subscriptions, here are links where you can get that. I also want to let everybody know that we will be taking questions throughout the presentation, and you can submit those by typing them into the question box. My colleague Catherine Shriver will collect those and relay them to the panelists. We'll take some time after each presentation. The Philly is going to go first, and then we'll take questions about their presentation, and then questions after the folks from Los Angeles, and then overall questions. So with that, let's turn it over to Irwin and Ian in Philadelphia.
Okay, hi, this is Irwin Traus.
This is Ian Phillips from Pennsylvania Acorn. Can you see our screen?
Yep.
They can't answer us. Okay.
Yes, yes. At least we can.
I'm an attorney at Philadelphia Legal Assistance in Philadelphia. We also run the Save Your Home Philly hotline, which is an integral part of the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas Residential Mortgage Foreclosure Diversion Pilot Program, which is the program that was created in Philadelphia. As you see from this title, describe it as part of a solution but no panacea. Before I sort of get into my formal outline here, I should let you know that you might hear some schizophrenia in my presentation, and that is because there are parts of this which are very good and very encouraging, and parts of it which are not quite what they're billed as. So, I mean, I have a slightly jaundiced view about what the capabilities of the program that resulted from a sort of a joint effort of the community and legal services in Philadelphia. But I'm sort of excited about the fact that this joint action has resulted in something that, if not perfect, has saved hundreds, if not at this point, perhaps thousands of homes, or we're at least getting in over the thousand level. And these are people whose homes certainly would have gone to foreclosure but for the creation of the program. Briefly, what we're going to talk about is where we are now. I'll give you a brief overview of how the so-called Philadelphia model works. Some of you may already have heard about the Philadelphia model because it is being held up as a national model. And there's been efforts in Congress, the United States Congress, to require other jurisdictions to duplicate it. Around the state, there's efforts to duplicate it. And there was recently just a bill passed in the state house. I'm sorry, a bill introduced, which I'll talk about a little bit later, to have it duplicated around the state. Having said that it's the Philadelphia model, one of the things you'll be hearing from me as we go through this proposal is I don't really believe it's a model because it's essentially a locally grown program, and that it's a model for using existing resources, bringing them together to make something work, but it's not something that I think can be or necessarily should be replicated in each place. Each place has its own unique conditions, and you'll hear that from the folks in California who are going to talk about their response to their situation. And the model for each locality has to come out of the conditions of that locality. So briefly, we'll describe the program, talk about how we got there. Ian's going to talk about the sort of history, the organizing effort that went into this. I might add a few comments about things that go back to, 20 years or more. I may get into some more details about how the program works, speak a little bit about what works, what doesn't, what it is and what it isn't, and some cautionary notes. At this point, we had a poll. We wanted to know who we were talking to. So if you could cue that next poll. So I don't know what's happening with the poll. I can't.
Here, I'll read the results for you quickly. Foreclosures in your state, the results are 53% judicial, 40% non-judicial, and 7% not sure.
Maybe, this is Marcia, maybe I can just offer a bit of explanation. The only person who does not see the poll is the person who has control. So that's, Irwin, why you couldn't see it.
So are we back now?
You're back now.
Or are we getting other questions?
Did you want
How about the mandatory mediation?
Okay, I'll launch that right now. Okay, and the results, does the jurisdiction where you work have any type of mandatory mediation? Yes, 17%, no, 73%, and not sure, 9%.
And folks in the audience who have actually defended foreclosure?
I'll launch that one right now. Question?
I guess I can keep talking while the poll's going on.
The result, I've got it for you, Irwin. The result, have you represented clients in foreclosure cases, is 63% yes and 37% no.
Okay.
Okay, you should have
control. All right, well, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
So now, what is the program? Well, the program, we have a little chart later on that I think the writing's too small to look at, so we'll just look at the words. You'll see on the right side of this picture, Mayor Nutter wants you to keep your home. There's a phone number. That's the number of the hotline. The point of the picture is that the program is not really a single thing. It really brings together many elements. It includes the court program, which I'll be describing in a minute. It includes outreach, part of which the city funds. It includes a hotline, the Save Your Homes Philly hotline, part of which the city funds. It includes housing counselors, part of which the city funds, volunteer private attorneys, and legal services attorneys, all of which contribute to make the official court part of it meaningful, without which, if the court was simply creating a place for homeowners and lenders to sit in a room together, we don't think that would be a very meaningful thing. Sort of in a nutshell, I'm going to run through the pieces of the program. There are pro bono judges They're called judges pro tem. I mean, these are also actually additional parts of what the program requires. Pro bono judges, training for attorney volunteers and counselors who are involved representing the homeowners, court-sanctioned pro se petitions to stay sheriff sales, which have been actually worked on and adopted by the court about a year or two before this program came into effect. Media campaign to make folks aware of the diversion program and make folks aware of the hotline. There's a city contribution to a state-sponsored mortgage rescue loan program, which needs to be expanded. There's also an element of an alternative that can be explored in these conciliation conferences. One of the things that's missing and that makes this whole program much less effective than it could be is the absence in Philadelphia of a robust private mortgage foreclosure defense bar. There really are not very many private lawyers, not legal services lawyers, who have elected to make their living defending foreclosures. And that absence is a big hole that we somehow need to figure out how to fill. The mortgage foreclosure diversion pilot program in a nutshell is as follows. For cases that, these are mortgage foreclosure cases started in the first judicial district of Pennsylvania, which is the Court of Common Pleas of Philadelphia. Philadelphia is a judicial foreclosure state. In order to foreclose, you have to file a complaint, get a judgment. So for cases that were started where complaints were filed before September 8, 2008, where there's a sheriff sale scheduled, the sheriff sale is postponed, and the lender is required to participate in a conference which is scheduled at the request of the homeowner. Originally, what we were calling the day backward cases, cases before September 8, 2008, was originally automatic, and after a time, it was changed to an opt-in program, which means the homeowner has to request, after getting a notice of the program's existence, has to request an opportunity to participate in a conference. Once the homeowner requests the opportunity, a conference is then scheduled. For cases started after September 8, 2008, which we call the day forward cases, a judgment of foreclosure can't be entered until a conference is concluded. So when a complaint is filed, a scheduling order goes out, scheduling a conference about 60 days after the date the complaint is filed. And until the conference event is closed, which means the conference is held and there's some disposition, which could be that the conference is postponed further, or it could be there's an agreement, the lender can't take a default judgment. And of course, if the defendant gets an attorney and files a response to the complaint, the conference can still take place, and if they file the response, the full judgments can't be entered anyway. But most clients are not represented, and so this process holds things up. It kind of puts a pause in the process. It prevents foreclosures from being entered until the homeowners get into a system where the likelihood of their being able to get representation is increased. This first figure, which is not that clear, sort of is designed to show that this is sort of a diversion program. You see over here, this line is what would normally happen in a foreclosure case. This arrow here is the diversion part of it. So with the day forward program, the complaint is filed, and then all the cases are sent over to this diversion program to see if this conciliation process can result in some resolution. The conciliation process is not designed, does not require anybody to give up any rights in order to participate in it. If an agreement is entered and the lender agrees to loan mod, then the loan is modified. But there's nothing that requires the homeowner to give up their right to defend in order to participate in the conciliation process.
Irwin, we have an initial question as to whether Pennsylvania is a judicial or non-judicial foreclosure state.
Yeah, it is a judicial. It's a judicial foreclosure state, which I think I mentioned at the outset. So it's there's a lot of hoops that are placed in front of, even without this program, there are a lot of hoops that are placed in front of a lender in order to get to foreclosure. It's probably in the best of circumstances, it's probably a 6-month process before they can get the sale, and probably 8-month process or 9 months before they can actually get possession of the property, even if a homeowner does nothing to defend. But they're getting judgments is actually pretty easy. You can get a default judgment after 30 days from the date of filing a complaint. The program begins when a notice of the program is sent to the homeowner, either with a complaint or with the sheriff's sale. The notice refers the homeowner to the hotline. The hotline is staffed by paralegals, and it's run by Philadelphia Legal Assistance, so the hotline staff are supervised by attorneys. The hotline sets up appointments with housing counselors. The hotline also does triage and selects appropriate cases for referral to the legal services programs in Philadelphia. There are 2, Philadelphia Legal Assistance and Community Legal Services, so that we can consider whether we want to get involved in the cases of eligible clients early on in the process. At the hotline, after the appointment's made with a housing counselor, the homeowner meets with the housing counselor, and there are 20-some, I don't remember the number exactly, housing counseling agencies that are involved in this that set up budgets and make proposals, affordable proposals, which they forward to the lender's counsel. Just a pause here. This notice that's up here on the screen now is the notice that is sent to the homeowners with the court papers. There's also another notice which is in typical legal language and small print. This notice was designed by one of the housing counseling agencies. I think PUP was primarily responsible for it, and the idea was to have it big, have the phone number big, so people would just call, would be encouraged to call. And it's worked pretty well. Most people getting foreclosures now, and Ian has percentages about this, are getting to the hotline. So the counselor works up a budget and a proposal, sends a proposal to the lender and the lender's attorney. And when I say lender, I use that word broadly to mean whoever it is that now has the rowing oar in dealing with the foreclosure. In most cases, we're dealing with servicers and their attorneys. The lenders are required to provide a counterproposal prior to the conference, and in theory, at the conference, if there's a gap between the proposal and the counterproposal, and the parties aren't able to resolve it themselves, the case will go to a judge pro tem who will hold the conference then and there. On the day of the conference, eligible, that is financially eligible clients who meet the LSC requirements are assigned to pro bono counsel who are in the courtroom, along with employees of VIP, which is the Volunteers for the Indigent program here that coordinates that. And they get assigned attorneys, and these attorneys all have participated in a training program. The conference itself is then conducted with the JPT and the lender and an attorney for the homeowner and the housing counselor and the client themselves. The JPT makes a recommendation. If a resolution is not reached, the JPT can recommend that the conference be continued. When these conferences are continued, they also will continue or postpone the sheriff's sale if one's scheduled, or the time that a default can be entered. We have in the courtroom legal services attorneys who are available to provide advice to the counselors and advice to the pro bono counsel as well, many of whom are not that familiar with foreclosure cases. But we can help them, give them some guidance as to whether there's merit to the underlying defense, which would justify rejecting an offer that is not affordable, and also give advice regarding strategies in the conferences and negotiation. If a conference fails to get a resolution, an order is entered permitting the sale to proceed. or the case to go to judgment. Usually there's some interlude that's placed there so that the homeowner can try to do something in court. Essentially, if the diversion program doesn't result in an acceptable resolution, the homeowner is still free to pursue whatever legal means they have. And we view this as one of the most valuable part of the whole process, is it does create an opportunity for people who often would not seek out legal representation to have access to legal representation. Because if often the volunteer attorneys will contact legal services and say, we can't reach a resolution, will you take the case over? In some of the cases, the volunteers volunteer not just to do the conciliation conferences, but also volunteer to continue the representation. And the hotline also there are a number of private attorneys for clients who are not LSC eligible that we can refer people to, attorneys who have indicated their willingness to represent people. So aside from the benefit of the process itself, there's also the benefit of actually getting people to attorneys, although the demand for representation is still much greater than the availability of representation. The hotline itself monitors the results of these conciliation conferences and provides sort of a feedback loop. We often get calls. When things go wrong, we'll get calls from the homeowners if the homeowner did not get the conference they were supposed to get, or if what's supposed to happen at the conference didn't happen. It comes back into the hotline, and one of our priorities at Philadelphia Legal Assistance is to take the legal steps necessary to make sure that the system is working the way it's supposed to. Also, the housing counselors are available to help homeowners with pro se petitions. And the court has been, now this is considered outside of the conciliation process, but the court, the two judges on the motion court who hear these petitions, have been somewhat receptive to pleas of homeowners that something didn't go right in the process, or that they need some more time to reach a resolution, and they've been willing to prevent or postpone the sheriff's sales to have that come about. So now I'm going to turn this over to Ian, who's going to give you a description of how we got to where we are.
Excuse me, can I interrupt just 1 second? This is Marcia. Just a couple of things. I know some people have been raising their hands, and for various technical reasons we're not able to take questions that way, so please use the question box on your control panel. Secondly, these PowerPoints will be available on the webinar webpage on our website, so you'll be able to refer to them again if you're interested. Okay, Ian, go ahead.
Thanks, Marcia. So what I'm going to try to do in the next 4 or 5 slides here is kind of illustrate the kind of relationship that is developed here over a long period of time between various community organizations, Acorn being one, and the great legal aid resources we have in our city. So this first slide kind of illustrates the different slides that I'm going to run through real quickly. So Acorn and many other organizations across the country have been engaged in kind of servicer-specific campaigns for years. I know that there's various organizations that do campaigns against Countrywide. Wells Fargo is a big one that Acorn undertook a few years ago. And those had some successes, but this is kind of has a different aim. So I just wanted to kind of illustrate that. The outcomes of these campaigns were often organization-specific. I know that as a result of an early campaign with Countrywide, there was a specific kind of advocacy called Advocacy Department that we had a direct line to that was eventually opened up to a lot of other organizations. And the same was true of Wells Fargo and some other organizations. So it didn't help everyone. If a borrower went to one organization, maybe they got great results with Wells Fargo. If they went to a different one, maybe they got great results with Citi, for example. The impacts necessarily are diffuse. So if you have some kind of great loss mitigation agreement with a particular company that may help you with those cases, but they didn't help kind of stopping this problem that we saw in Philadelphia and really across the country, where a foreclosure or a series of foreclosures really start to tear down a neighborhood's integrity and then build on itself. You know, just because you can stop the 2 countrywide foreclosures in a 10-block radius doesn't mean that there's not 20 Wells Fargos in that particular neighborhood that you can't stop, for example. So in January 2008, a series of community organizations, we started meeting at Philadelphia Unemployment Project and legal aid attorneys. So that started in January 2008. All of these organizations that I'm going to go through in the next kind of click have been working on this for years upon years. So it wasn't that we weren't all doing our own thing, but kind of bringing us together under one roof and working on one thing pretty jointly definitely led to some good results. So these are some of the organizations and folks that were involved in this group at various levels. For a period, we're meeting every couple of weeks as this campaign really started getting off the ground. Initially, we had talked about, through our partnership of maybe bringing a lawsuit, as was done in 2004, to kind of carve out Philadelphia as a place where servicers would have to prove that they were kind of conforming to best practices existing at the time, so that they could proceed with their foreclosures in the city. Obviously, we had some experience with that in 2004, which I'll get to in a second. Our unofficial motto, not to offend any of the kind of Midwesterners on the call, but we didn't have the kind of as extreme a crisis as was in Cleveland, Detroit, or even some of the markets that grew more quickly, specifically in the West, Southwest, and South. We didn't have those problems. We had relatively stable housing prices and still do, but we could see that based on our origination times that a large amount of foreclosures and were beginning to happen and would continue to grow over the next year. So we kind of defined the crisis in that way to our legislators and eventually to our court folks. All organizations here that are mentioned above had long histories of working together on this issue and working on the issue generally of preventing foreclosures and housing. PUP and CLS were instrumental in the creation of HEMAP, which is our kind of award-winning statewide program that will take over the payments of someone who is facing unemployment or pay off an existing arrearage, someone who has a loss of income. It was created in 1983 largely out of a giant unemployment spike and recession at that time, mainly in the western part of the state. ACORN and CLS worked very hard to pass a local anti-predatory lending law in 2001, which was quickly preempted at the state level. More on that later because there's some parallels to today. And then in 2004, as I mentioned, all of the groups kind of that form maybe the broad outline of the coalition were involved in a court case which the sheriff joined to temporarily postpone sheriff sales in the city. Also, many of the groups that are on this coalition above are part of a steering group, which I'm going to get a little bit more into in the next slide. So we're able to kind of all speak with one voice at this larger steering group.
And Ian, this is Marcia. I'm sorry to interrupt, but if you could try to wrap up in just a minute or two. I know there's a lot to cover, but we do want to get to LA and then questions. So sorry to interrupt.
No problem. So this is kind of these slides kind of detail how the campaign developed here. We ran basically what was a very typical kind of campaign for community organizations, kind of lobbying decision makers in certain districts in particular to put pressure on the sheriff, as we felt that he had the power to kind of change the schedule of the way sheriff sales were happening in the city. So pressuring the sheriff. This is built in part off the 2004 experience, where we involved the sheriff in a temporary postponement of sheriff sales. We tried for months upon months to get meetings with the sheriff, which he kept canceling, and then we kind of started resorting to the folks on council and other politicians to start sending him letters. This began really in January of 2008. On March 25th, we held a pretty decent-sized rally in the Olney neighborhood, which is one of the hardest-hit areas of foreclosures in the city. We had of the loans that were originated 3 years prior, starting in 2005, 2006, close to 60% were subprime originations, and just the volume there was pretty high. So that's why we selected that neighborhood. The sheriff was supposed to come, ended up canceling. The meeting was led by 4 folks that were facing foreclosure. They talked about their own situations, and then some of their neighbors talked about how a foreclosure on their block would affect their property values. There were several city council members in the room. Councilman Curtis Jones, who is widely quoted as saying either we'll stop it with a moratorium voluntarily or we'll cut the sheriff's budget, which he's a freshman. I don't know that he necessarily has the ability to do that, but it was a good quote to have in the paper. So 2 days after that, the city council passed a non-binding resolution calling on the president and judge to postpone sales. The sheriff and his staff walked in about 30 minutes after that and said that the sheriff sales that were scheduled the following Tuesday would not take place. We really feel like this was a catalyst, but it obviously wouldn't have meant anything if not for kind of the judge's involvement and the committee that kind of designed this. So this is a little bit of brief background on Judge Rizzo and her kind of experience in bringing this group of all the stakeholders, so to speak, together to try to design a program. After the sheriff kind of unilaterally decided to postpone the sheriff sales, this program was created. It was really drafted by the court and then commented on and revised by the steering committee, and really was ready to roll in about 7 weeks. So I think we felt that was a pretty big accomplishment in itself. I'm going to skip a little bit ahead. I think we went over how the program works, but
and we do have lots of questions too, so we want to be able to
wrap it up. My last slide. So we felt it was really important to do outreach and not just the typical kind of media campaigns, but really aggressively targeting these folks who we know it was hard to break through kind of the noise once folks fall into foreclosure. So we've had really great experience in doing that. Acorn does about half of the outreach for the city in a given month, and then there's various neighborhood action committees, and PUP recently started doing outreach. Our current participation rate is in some months as high as 80%, and we also know because of the outreach that a great majority of the homeowners that don't show and are listed as failure to appears are actually vacant houses or otherwise not owner-occupied homes and therefore ineligible. So I'm going to turn it back over to Irwin to wrap up, and then hopefully we'll get some questions.
I'm not sure what our time is, but I think we might be able to just go into the questions, and I could probably.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do that for just briefly, and then we'll proceed on to Los Angeles. So, Catherine, do you want to go ahead with the questions?
Yes, the first question for Irwin. How common is it for a homeowner, even in foreclosure, to be able to meet LSC eligibility requirements?
In Philadelphia, it's very common. Philadelphia has a history of home ownership by low-income homeowners. The housing stock in Philadelphia has historically been, although it's changing somewhat, but historically there's been affordable houses. So we've been doing foreclosures since legal services began in Philadelphia, and there are a lot of homeowners who are eligible. And in fact, probably 40%, 30 or 40% of the folks in foreclosure might be LSC eligible in the city.
Well, thank you. Both presenters, with your notice and media campaign, do you see fewer scam artists trying to charge huge fees for loan modification help?
No, we still see a great deal of that, actually. And we actually, sometimes when we're on the doors, knocking on doors and talking to folks, they will say, I'm working with such and such an agency, which is known to be, we know all the agencies that do nonprofit housing counseling in the city, and we tell them, staff don't pay them any money, call the hotline, etc. Or if they're working with a Chapter 13 bankruptcy attorney, which is fairly common, we'll tell them, you should try this out maybe first, and if you don't like how it works out, you're not, opting out of any legal options that you might have in the future. We knew part of the reason that we wanted to do this outreach is because these scam artists are getting very good, and even the bankruptcy attorneys' mailings look a lot like court documents.
Yeah, there's been no abatement of the multiplication of different kinds of scams. I mean, there's the traditional mortgage rescue scams. Now, in fact, they're just getting more creative. More and more of them. Since the Obama program, there's a proliferation of all these people, saying that they sort of work for the government and it can help you save your home. It's not unlike what happened a number of years ago in Pennsylvania with FHA home repair mortgages.
Maybe we could take one more question, and then we'll move on to LA, and then we'll have time for additional questions at the end.
Okay. Did you encounter resistance from the bank's attorneys in setting up this program, and how did you get buy-in from the courts?
Yeah, well, this is a very interesting piece of this. I'll try to be brief. Ian touched on the history. This is not something that came out of whole cloth. The history of this in the modern age goes back to the 80s, when there was litigation that resulted in a moratorium that lasted for about between 9 and 12 months, while the HEMAP legislation was pending. Then in 2004, we filed a POA and CLS with the attorneys representing a number of groups, including Acorn and Pup, and the sheriff, as Ian mentioned. We filed a lawsuit which was in front of Judge Rizzo to postpone the sheriff's sales of 256 properties. Out of that lawsuit, in managing that lawsuit, the judge created a steering committee consisting of the attorneys representing the overwhelming majority, probably about 80% of the foreclosures, as well as advocates for the homeowners, and over time she brought in other people to just manage that litigation. When that litigation was over, anticipating that there would be subsequent lawsuits to stop sheriff sales, Judge Rizzo kept that committee together and kept that committee working. And that committee was working on a number of things, including reducing sheriff sales and creating this pro se bankruptcy petition that I mentioned. I'm sorry, pro se petition to stay sales that I mentioned. And they've been working on issues regarding foreclosure, so that when the sheriff kind of created an emergency by unilaterally postponing the sales, the court came to this committee and said, look, guys, the court wants to take ownership of this. We can't just have the sheriff postponing sales. We need to come up with something. And the judge, and I give a tremendous amount of credit to Judge Rizzo, was very good about getting buy-in from the lenders who were already part of this process to create a sensible process. So they were involved in the creation of the program. Now we've had lots of fights in the committee, but there's been a lot of buy-in overall in the creation of the program. And another thing that Judge Rizzo has done very well, and a lot of the publicity that the program has gotten, it's created an atmosphere in which the lenders are feeling some external pressure to be reasonable because everybody's looking at them. And,
I'm sorry, but can you just finish up and we need to move on?
All right, yes. Sorry. So the short answer is there is resistance, but the process itself has resulted in at least the attorney bar being very cooperative in the process. Though in the individual hearings, they often will balk at coming up with reasonable agreements.
Okay, thanks. And as I said, we will have questions again at the end, but we do need to move on and hear from Antonio and Carlotta in L.A. If we can pass control along to them. And they are facing very different circumstances than in Pennsylvania because California is a non-judicial foreclosure state, so a different approach has been necessary. So go ahead.
Hello, everyone. This is Antonio Hicks, and I'm a staff attorney in the housing unit of Neighborhood Legal Services of Los Angeles County, and I'm here with
Carlotta Garcia. I'm an organizer with 1LA IAF, part of a national network of the Industrial Areas Foundation.
All right. If we could go to slide number 2. Let me just start out by saying that California actually is both a judicial and non-judicial state. However, the overwhelming majority of foreclosures are done through non-judicial, the non-judicial way. So Carlotta's about to frame sort of the way this project came together. But before she gets into that, I did want to have the first and second polling questions so we can get a feel for the type of work and if folks out there are working, the legal services folks are working with community organizers.
Okay, I've launched the first poll question, which is, do you work with community organizers? I'll give people a second to vote on that. And I've closed that poll, and the results are yes 52% and no 48%.
Okay, and can we go ahead and launch the second question?
Sure.
Okay.
And the second question is, have you sought or are you seeking loan modifications on behalf of borrowers? Give people a minute to vote. And the results of that poll are 70% yes and 30% no.
All right, so at this point I'm going to turn it over to Carlotta to kind of develop the framework of the project. And, I guess most of the people listening are, like myself, legal services attorney or advocate. And I really do want to stress that this particular project was heavily influenced by our partnership with 1LA. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. So, named Carlotta Garcia. 1LA IF is part of a national network, and the Industrial Areas Foundation, as I had mentioned. And on the local level in Los Angeles proper, we work across the county. We have about 85 institutions organized in regional clusters. And so this foreclosure work emerged out of conversations with leaders in the San Fernando Valley cluster, which have about 8 institutions, including religious institutions, nonprofits, some elementary schools, and across different ethnicities and income lines and languages as well. So this group is a long-standing group that's been in Los Angeles for a number of years. And this whole focus on foreclosures largely began last year when Father John, one of the pastors with Mary Immaculate Catholic Church, one of our member institutions, he just started. He had just come in from Texas. Within his first week of arrival, he was approached by a family who asked him for prayers because they were about to lose their home. And he was appalled because this family didn't look like the stereotypical poor family, but one with means. They were both professional, they were educated, but they had gotten into a bad loan and were about to lose their their shelter. So he began to ask around to other leaders who were members of the organization, and discovered that that wasn't the only case of people talking about this. And so he, with other, with the organization, basically launched a campaign of house meetings where people would talk to each other about what they were dealing with, how they got into their loans, and how banks were responding to them. And what we began to hear is a lot of families were just clearly in a lot of pain, but also realizing that the banks who had courted them so assiduously during the good times were now turning a deaf ear to them, and so they would call and request modifications or request some sort of assistance when their loan terms changed, and the banks were basically ignoring them. And when leaders met with public officials in the Los Angeles area, we realized, with one of our local Congress members, he just literally did not know what was happening. And so in the midst of this, the banks on a national level were launching very strong PR campaigns, testifying to the mod programs that they were making available to homeowners, and buying full-page ads in publications such as the New York Times. And so the organization basically decided to test out what the banks were doing. So I guess starting in November and December, we started organizing borrowers into groups we called cohorts, bank by bank, and we would have them meet with their banker and then share with each other and with the leadership what the banks were telling them. And then out of that experience and out of homeowners, interactions with the bank and what they were hearing from them, as well as what their own financial situation was, a few leaders sort of took that and crafted a proposal that was rooted in what was happening in Los Angeles proper. And in case I didn't mention, in San Fernando Valley, there's just hundreds of thousands of people about to lose their homes. Actually, LA County proper. And in the Valley in particular, it's one of the hot spots for foreclosures. So basically, leaders had this proposal, and they started bringing it to different public officials, but they weren't, public officials still, felt incapable of intervening in any way that was helpful to families. And they realized they needed to basically demonstrate that they had a constituency. So in January, they organized a public assembly of 1,500 people in the San Fernando Valley, and they invited elected officials from the federal Congress level down to their local city council people. And they basically challenged the public officials to work with the organization and to invest some hard money to prevent foreclosures. And Antonio is going to describe the proposal that was developed. But what they were successful in getting, or what we were successful in getting, was basically leveraging $1 million in local city funds. And we are using that money to bring banks to the table to negotiate individual loans, but then also to be thinking on a larger scale of what kind of modification programs would work that entail and sort of integrate shared sacrifice for the borrower, as well as taxpayers, as well as the banks themselves. And really trying to get them to reduce principal. Now, this is, I guess the significance of this local project is that we are in conversation with people on the congressional level or the federal level and thinking about how future neighborhood stabilization programs could be used to prevent foreclosures in this manner. And so we're hopeful that in the next 6 months or 9 months that we'd be able to demonstrate the efficacy of this method. And so while there were many essential pieces, borrowers willing to share what they were going through, the technical assistance by neighborhood services, there were a couple policy long ties who created a data set that support the proposal. What really moved it forward was that there was a pre-existing broad-based organization that was wanting to move forward and really demonstrate their vision and their strategy and wanting to figure out ways to intervene on behalf of families. And so I'm going to pass it off to Antonio, who's going to really delve deep into what that process looks like to get it there.
I think it bears mentioning at this point, I'm sure that the people listening are probably taking a deep breath right now. I think the vast majority of the activities that Carlotta was describing are restricted by LSC, so clearly this effort required the involvement of a community organizer, which could actually go out into the community and organize folks to help move this process along. And so again, that's why it's so important. Otherwise, we're just sitting in our office, looking for ways to impact the community and not really being able to go out there and do anything about it. So NLS has been a longtime member of 1LA, a member institution, and our partnership on this particular project really took off right around the time when we were looking at how we can start doing foreclosure prevention work. And the idea of representing individuals one by one and trying to modify their individual loan just did not seem to have to be the best utilization of our resources. And so we kind of developed this, what we've called collective negotiation, if you will. And I'm going to sort of take you step by step, more or less how we went about doing that. And I think at this point it also bears mentioning, for those of you interested in reading a little bit more about the project, there is an article, I believe, in the May-June issue of the Clearinghouse Review in which I talk a little bit more about some of these things.
And that article is available on the webinar webpage, which people will receive a link to. So go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So basically, we collaborated with multiple partners. Obviously, when you're going to try to create a community-based program, you're going to need a lot of help. The legal services can only go so far. 1LA can only go so far. And so we also needed to recruit a HUD-certified counseling agency. And we got New Economics for Women involved, and they were able to provide us support by basically giving us one or two HUD counselors to do the counseling component of the work that we did. And we also had a volunteer, and I'm not sure where we found her, but she was a former VP of a bank, and she had a lot of inside knowledge that also helped guide us in a way that we could understand the bank's interests. So the first thing that we needed to do, once we basically divided 4 groups into the banks that we kind of selected the banks. It was somewhat arbitrary, but we kind of selected 4 that we thought we'd have the best chance and that had the largest numbers of individuals. So we chose Countrywide, which is now Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Chase, and IndyMac. And the IndyMac choice we thought was going to be the most positive one because it had just been taken over by the FDIC, and we felt like at the time they were supposedly the ones with the gold standard for modifications. Anyways, that didn't turn out to be the case, but that was one of the reasons we chose them. So once we divided them up, the first thing was to train the cohorts of borrowers. So again, 1LA went out into the community, brought folks in that were interested in working on this, that also were facing potential foreclosure. We trained them in financial literacy, so basically understanding their mortgage, understanding securitized mortgages, and also introducing them to the types of loan modifications. And so in addition to that training, each one that was going through this process would meet one-on-one with a HUD-certified counselor who could go over their particulars, their financial information, their budgets, and sort of create some parameters by which they could negotiate with the bank. So the next stage after that was and again, it's hard to describe it really quickly, but again, through our partnership with 1LA, we were able to contact various people that we knew and various people that they knew to kind of get to some decision makers at the 4 different banks that we chose to bring them to the table and say, hey, we want you to come out to our office and meet one-on-one with borrowers. And so we were able to get to, as I said before, Chase, which included Washington Mutual and EMC, Wells Fargo, which includes America Servicing Company, Countrywide, Bank of America, and IndyMac. So we actually got them to agree to send loss mitigators to our office and to meet with the borrowers one-on-one. And so as part of that process, again, 1LA, New Economics for Women, and NLS were actively involved in the process. And I think Carlotta wants to make some comments about those meetings.
In addition to them coming out, we also leveraged their commitment ahead of time that they would follow up with us afterwards and share what they were doing with the borrowers. Because so many borrowers are getting lost in the black hole, we wanted to make sure there was some form of accountability to follow up afterwards.
Yes, yeah. When we designed this sort of this program, we thought it was very important to have a feedback loop at all stages. So, for example, on the day that a particular servicer showed up here, we would have an orientation for borrowers beforehand, kind of get them riled up and understand their interest and encourage them to ask for principal reduction, et cetera. And then after, and during the actual meetings, we would have either a volunteer or someone from staff basically sit in on those negotiations and kind of take notes, not be actively involved in the conversation unless there was some clarification needed, but basically sitting in to kind of see, where this give and take was, if there was any. And then also at the end of the negotiation, someone would debrief the borrower, and we actually have provided that. I believe it'll be available on the website, the sort of a questionnaire that we would use with every borrower once they finished, so we could, again, track what the banks were actually doing and how these negotiations were actually going. Now, this is the other part where a lot of you may be wondering, and again, I can't emphasize how much work and dedication this does require from a lot of people. And this part of it was definitely very time-consuming, and that was monitoring the modification. So setting up the groups, again, that was a lot of work. But once they actually met with the servicers, then it was really also our responsibility to follow up directly with those banks. And so initially we were scheduling meetings every 2-3 weeks to talk with the particular decision maker at those banks and having them provide us with a spreadsheet letting us know where things were going. And so that part wasn't too bad, but then you also have 200 borrowers coming into the office wondering what's going on with their situation. So that also was certainly a challenge. And then we also, as we were learning the types of modifications that were being offered and sort of the way the banks were thinking, we had to develop our own criteria on how to evaluate those modifications in terms of whether we thought they were good for the community and were sustainable, or were basically just putting Band-Aids in the problem. And at this point, I'll let Carlotta talk about crafting the order proposal.
All right, just in brief, that following their meetings with the banks, people would gather together, again, in-house meetings, talk to each other, and share information about what they were hearing from the banks. We also collected a lot of financial information from the families themselves, and we were able to evaluate their financial capacity. And based on that, we realized that 50% of the borrowers that we were working with, and probably 50% of the homeowners, simply wouldn't be able to afford their home, even if their loan were reduced to the current market value. And so part of our work has been educating people about, their I guess, borrowing capacity, but then also, with the other 50% of the folks, basically teaching them how to leverage and to negotiate with the bank directly, knowing that if they were to foreclose, the banks would be losing more money than if they made some sort of deal with the borrower. So part of that was understanding the self-interest of the bank in terms of their net present value analysis and making sure that they were able to make as much money as possible, and not asking the bank for something that was against their own self-interest. And then, as I had mentioned before, as we developed the proposal, we did so with somebody with a public policy background, with a former VP with one of the banks, as well as some attorneys, and together we crafted a proposal that addressed the fact that a large number of people couldn't afford it, but we could have the potential to stop the foreclosure rate by 50%. And so given that, we wanted to leverage as much government support as possible into this. And so the proposal, do you want me to do that?
Yeah.
Okay, and so the proposal simply is to ask the banks and try to leverage the banks to make long-term fixed payments. And by that we mean a fixed interest rate over the life of the loan, set at a reasonable rate. There are a number of families walking in with 11% or 9% or 12% interest rates. We're trying to get the banks to bring that down to a reasonable level, around 5. And in cases in which reducing the interest rate is not enough to keep somebody in their home or to enable somebody to keep their home, we are pressuring for principal reduction so that the borrower has a little bit of a possibility of paying into some equity. Usually with a 30-year amortized loan, with every payment, there's a little bit of principal that gets reduced, and so over time, a family can expect to build, to have some equity in their home as their home value appreciates or just over time as they pay off their loan. And so part of getting the banks to reduce the principal is recognizing that borrowers need to have a stake in paying off the loan. And the other element was getting, and this is where the city money comes in, and potentially federal money over the long term, is getting publicly funded silent second loans to further reduce the payments. And these loans would be paid back to the city government or whatever public entity provided the funds upon sale or refinance of the home. And we have that component tied to that because, we recognize that it's in the public interest and taxpayers' interest to begin setting a floor to the housing market and for there to be stability in the neighborhoods. But we also recognize that taxpayers have to be reimbursed for the money that they're investing. Nationwide, we just threw millions and millions of dollars through the TARP program to some of these major banks that are too big to fail, but all that money has not translated into modifications on the ground and some real help to regular families. And so what we want is for government money to be invested in families directly, but also in such a way that the taxpayers can expect to be paid back.
Great. Can we move on to questions now, or are you guys, do you need a minute more to wrap up?
Yeah, we could probably take a minute more.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, you can skip past the problems with modifications. I think most of the listeners, if so many percentage are doing this, they know what the problems are. I just wanted to talk really quickly about the 1LA proposal, which is 2 slides away, before we wrap up. And again, Stephanie Hafner, who's the directing attorney housing, is the principal author of this. Just so folks understand, we're actually able to target $1 million of community reinvestment funds for use in the particular council district that is within our service area. And the idea is to use that money for about 20 to 30 borrowers and get the banks to reduce principal a certain amount and then also kick in a soft second from that government money to achieve an affordable payment. And we believe that this will actually help more borrowers than the Obama plan. So we don't have time to get into all those details, but that's basically the idea. So originally we were hoping to get the banks to reduce principal to current market value, but we might have overshot on that issue. And so we're currently in negotiations with the banks, and actually there are a couple of the banks that we mentioned that are interested in looking at this as a pilot project. Again, they're not willing to say, yeah, we're going to do this across the board, but the idea of them getting a check of government funds right off the bat is somewhat interesting to them. And so we've been able to do a net present value analysis to show the banks that it makes sense, as opposed to foreclosure, to reduce the principal somewhat and then have a soft second kick in. And obviously the borrowers are happy with that proposal. The timeline, I guess we don't have time to go into that. Our contact information is at the end for those wishing to follow up, and I guess at this point...
And it's also on the webpage.
Okay, great.
And just one other point of contact. I mean, if there are folks out there who are interested in working with a community broad-based organization, such as the Industrial Areas Foundation, you can look up our affiliates in Arizona, in Texas, in Nevada, as well as on the East Coast. And the website is www.industrialareasfoundation.org.
And before the questions come in, I'm sure people are wondering how we're able to do all this stuff. Let me just say our deputy director is very committed to this. She's a long-time, partner with 1LA, and she is able to make things happen within the organization. So it's definitely not just me. There's quite a few people here at NLS that are working on this, and so that is really important for any of you out there who are considering something of this nature. You've got to have upper management's support on this.
Great. Thank you. And let's move right into questions. Catherine?
Okay, we have a couple specifically for the LA presenters, and then we have quite a few for both teams. But following up on your last comment there, how does NLS avoid LSC restrictions, and what exactly is NLS's role in the project?
Okay, yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, I want to make it very clear that, yeah, I mean, we are very aware of the LSC restrictions, and as I said before, and so our role is essentially as technical advisors. So we have certain expertise that we're able to bring to the table, whereas 1LA does not have any of those restrictions. They can actually go out into the community, bring people together, and then, and then invite us to be there to say, for example, do a training on financial literacy or what their legal options are, what the time frame is for the foreclosure process, et cetera. So that's really our role. And then, of course, we obviously have other administrative staff that can do sort of administrative functions that do not violate LSE restrictions. Which, again, a program of this nature does have we have to copy a lot of loan docs and things of that nature. So that is essentially our role, is just as technical advisors.
We've had a couple questions about the monitoring of the modifications. Do you have any analysis or results yet in LA?
We do. I'll let Carlotta. We didn't want to publish this data because it's somewhat fluid, but we can give people an idea, a rough idea of more or less what we've seen.
And so what we found so far, we started with, our initial cohort was about 115 families, and then we've gone up to 200 over the last 3 months. So this report really looks at the first 100 who met with their lenders in December and in January. So what we're finding across the board is that banks are not making meaningful modifications, and by that we mean a fixed payment for the life of the loan with the opportunity to earn equity through paying off the loan. So out of all those families, less than 14% actually got a long-term fixed payment for the life of the loan. Most of them 30 years, a couple for 40 years. We've also, are noticing that most of the modifications that are coming through involve payment shock. And after 2 to 5 years. So, for example, 80% of countrywide offers were short-term mods, and many of them involved interest-only payments for 5 to 10 years before the principal payments increased, before the payment actually increased to incorporate principal. And so that was very disturbing to us because, if you're looking at interest only for 5 to 10 years, you're basically asking a family to pay rent, but they're actually not, helping the family keep their home, and the family will probably fall into the same situation once the terms of their loan changed again. And then the third thing is that, the delay time in the decision making is excessive and irresponsible. A lot, we have found ourselves basically fighting off the banks seeking to make foreclosures after they delay the decision-making process. So a family who met with a bank in December with Chase Bank, they still haven't gotten a modification. They're actually just now getting a modification, But 3 weeks ago, Chase wanted to move forward on the foreclosure, and we had to sort of fight, pressure them, push them back, and say, well, wait a second, you haven't made a decision on this, so the family can't make a decision about what they're going to do, and so foreclosing on them in this circumstance doesn't make sense. So the only reason we have that kind of pushback with the banks or with the lenders is because we felt up that constituency to pressure them. So that's more or less, those are the major themes that we're noticing with the modifications.
Okay, now we have a question for both teams. How has the White House's Home Affordable Modification Program impacted your programs?
Billy, you guys want to go first?
Yeah.
Irwin?
You can go first if you like. Okay, well,
Don't be shy.
This is a good question because it lets me make a couple points. One is, I think it is true from what I've understand of the California program, and it's certainly true of our program, is that at least our program is a procedural program, and unless there are external factors forcing the lenders to come up with affordable agreements, there's a limit to what any kind of mediation program can do. And one of the things that the Obama program has done for a large number of the loans where the lenders prior to the program were resistant to coming up with something meaningful, they have at least put things on hold. And we don't know what the outcome is going to be. But we've seen a lot of lenders putting stuff on hold so they can evaluate them under the Obama plan. And I have an individual case where the lender was absolutely adamant about not wanting to participate in this process at all. We ended up having 3 conciliation conferences, and the judge forced them to participate. But then the Obama program came into effect, and then everything's on hold, and now it's been like 4 months. They keep postponing the sheriff's sale because they're trying to figure out what they need to do to comply. So it's definitely affected the lenders' willingness to consider things. It's sort of changed the paradigm, I think. The servicers realize now they have to consider things that they weren't willing to consider before.
Any comment from LA on that?
Yeah, I mean, and the housing market in California differs, I think, from other housing markets. So for example, the average cohort member is underwater by $150,000. And so the refinance component of the Obama proposal is unhelpful to the California market because people owe so much more than what their houses are currently worth. In regards to the modification component of this plan, it's not required of any of the lenders. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, owners of loans, those are the loans that are required to be considered for this modification. But the rest, most of the loans are not owned by these two entities, and so most of the families are not going to be helped by that. And the other component, that we find, of concern to us is that after 5 years, the interest rates go back up, and so the payments are going to be, instead of payments being amortized over 30 years, they're going to be amortized over, 25 years. And so the payment shock is something that we're looking at, and something that we think can perpetuate this problem, 5 years out.
Can I just make a comment? I think it is not correct that the Obama plan, the Homes Affordable Mortgage Program, applies to the, I think it's now 11 or 12 servicers who have signed up. It's irrespective of who the holder of the loan is. It's not just for Fannie Mae. The modifications are not just for Fannie Mae. If you're in default, or if you're behind, or there's a chance that you will be in default shortly.
Yeah, no, we agree with that, Irwin. I think she was just saying that initially those were the only ones that had to do it, and there's still outs, right? They can do this net present value analysis, and they can still get out of having to actually do it. And but yes, you're absolutely right. There's, I think it's on the website, the banks that have formally signed agreements saying that they were going to try to implement it. And in our negotiations with the banks, they often use that Obama plan as an excuse as to, well, there's a lot of political pressure for us to do this, and we can't look at anything else right now. And it certainly changes the net present value analysis that we do when we're trying to pitch our proposal versus the Obama plan. So it has affected us, and it is helping some borrowers, but over the long term, we still think that it's going to fall short.
Another question?
Yeah,
Okay.
If I could just add that generally speaking, for low income, the 31% figure, you're only available. The goal in the Obama plan is to get your payment down to 31%. For low income folks, that 31% is often not a meaningful number, and the Obama plan is not that helpful, other than the procedural part of it, which delays everything for a while, which in itself is helpful. The substance of the plan is not that helpful for low income folks. At least that's what we've been finding.
Okay, Catherine?
Okay, the next question is, were you able to use HUD counselors and volunteers with banking background, and if so, how? Both teams or either team?
So in Los Angeles, we relied heavily on a partnership with a HUD-certified foreclosure prevention counseling agency, and they basically, we would prepare borrowers to meet with them, and they would take on their cases. They had individualized meeting with the borrowers to make sure they understood their loans, and then we, collaborated with them in the follow-up. In regards to volunteers from the banking industry, through our connections as a community organizations, we were able to pull in a volunteer into our strategy, and that's what helped strengthen the proposal that we crafted around the experience of homeowners.
Now, we haven't used any folks from the banking industry that I can think of, but we do, as I said, the whole program is premised on our using housing counselors. Most of the housing counselors that are funded by the city are also HUD-certified counselors. Though we don't use, there's a certain cohort of counselors who are trained in being part of the diversion program, and those are the ones we concentrate on. So we won't refer clients to someone just because they're a HUD-certified counselor if they have not been trained in the diversion program. And the only ones that are being trained presently in the diversion program are those that are funded by the Philadelphia Office of Housing and Community Development. In fact, there's a bit of a problem, with the Hope Now number. People are referred to Hope Now, the Hope Now hotline that really does not know what's going on, particularly in Philadelphia, and some of the clients that go to them are getting misinformation, which is something we have to deal with. There are counselors out there who are funded by NeighborWorks or by other places who are not part of this network, and people can get misinformation from them that we need to make an effort to make sure that they all are knowledgeable about what's going on with the diversion program.
And if I could just step in and say something or add something else. I mean, what seems clear from the Philadelphia project as well as the Los Angeles project is that, HUD-certified counselors, their individualized approach isn't enough to help borrowers navigate the changes in the banking industry and the changes to the housing market. I mean, it really does require a number of organizations working together, to basically walk borrowers through this process. And counseling agencies on their own, just as, organizations on their own, basically wouldn't have the capacity to deal with it. It really does require, a group really taking charge and really creating something that works for the group.
Another question, Catherine?
Okay, we have another one for both Philadelphia and LA. Have you been able to get larger firms to help in the pro bono component, given their real or perceived conflict issues?
In Philly, we have had great success getting firms involved and getting them to waive their conflicts. And a great deal of credit goes to the VIP program. Stephanie Selden's the managing attorney who's been involved in this, at the Judge Rizzo herself. To the extent that this program in Philadelphia has had success, a lot of it goes to the fact that there was a judge who was motivated to make this successful. She spent a lot of capital going to the Philadelphia Bar Association to get people to volunteer to be judges pro tem, and went to all of the big firms to get them to volunteer, to participate as volunteer lawyers. Now, one of the things that enabled them to do that and to waive the conflicts has been the limited nature of the representation. When they sign on, they don't sign on necessarily to litigate the entire case, though some lawyers will do that. The number is few. Most of them are just signing on to participate in the mediation, the conciliation part of it. As a general matter, though, the conflicts are a great obstacle to getting big firm lawyers to defend foreclosure cases, and that's been a problem for years. That we, despite the limited success here, is a big problem that we don't have a solution to.
Yeah, no, in LA we have not had any success in terms of big firms. We have some interest in the sort of a lot of solo practitioners, but we're always concerned that maybe they're just doing it out of self-interest, that they want to get into the business of doing home modification work. But yeah, big firms is a huge obstacle for us here.
Another question. We just have a few minutes left, so we'd like to get through as many as we can. Catherine?
Okay. We have a question for Ian from someone in East Tennessee. How can I get Acorn involved? They don't have any foreclosure defense attorneys there.
I'm sorry, it cut out for a second there. Can you repeat that?
Okay. This question is for Ian. How can I get Acorn involved in East Tennessee? They don't have any foreclosure defense attorneys there.
I mean, Acorn, we don't have attorneys. We're across the country, but I think obviously we're not in Eastern Tennessee. I think you, as Irwin pointed out, and as the Los Angeles example points to, you have to look at your existing resources to see if there is a community organization or an advocacy group that does this type of thing. At this point, given kind of the dispersion of NeighborWorks-funded groups, if not in your particular locality, at least at the state level, there are NeighborWorks-funded housing counselors, and that's a good start, I think, as far as getting, connected with a housing counseling group. Procedurally, I think that you're going to have to mobilize something with all the different stakeholders in your particular locality, and obviously the kind of having leadership of a Judge Rizzo, in our case, was critical. I hope at the end we can pass on contact information, because I don't know if I answered that question fully, but it didn't.
Yeah, it's on your contact information is on the webpage.
Okay. Feel free to contact me further if we need to follow up.
Another question, Catherine?
Yes, for the LA team, do you present a proposal for each client, or do you fill out the financials requested by the bank and request a modification offer?
Yeah, did you want to take that? Go ahead.
Well, I'm excited about this part because what we're teaching people is how to negotiate in their own self-interest. So, you know, Juana Rodriguez is this woman who speaks very broken English, and she came to this country about 20 years ago. She had a good job. You know, she borrowed a small amount to get a small condo, but she was borrowing at 9 and 11% interest. So when she was learning from other people what a reasonable interest rate is, and when she met with her housing counselor and discovered what kind of modification it would take to get her in, she basically negotiated with Countrywide a reduction down to 5.75 over 30 years. And she did so just being very clear about what she wanted and telling the bank, you know, she didn't just show up and say, hey, help me, I'm going to lose my home. You know, she said, look, you know, if you don't want to lose this house, I'm ready to walk away, but I need 5.75 over 30 years fixed, otherwise I can't keep the home. It doesn't work for me. And you know, over a period of about 4 months, she was able to negotiate that down. So that's one, you know, way. And then I don't know if Antonio, you want to jump in?
Yeah, no, I did. I mean, this is more of a technical issue for our fellow legal services. I mean, we actually had the borrower sign something, and again, we could provide examples where it basically says the proposal that we're talking about is kind of a separate piece that we're working on, and then we're going to determine which borrowers might be eligible for that program. But in terms of the overall modification process, if you will, you know, we're basically just helping them understand their particular financial position and monitoring the outcome. So we're not necessarily negotiating on their behalf.
Thanks. This is Marcia again, and I need to jump in. We are just about out of time, and I just have a couple of things to wrap up. One, when you log off, you'll receive a very short survey asking you a few questions. Please do respond to that. It will help us in planning our future coverage of this topic. Two, someone raised a question about the audio. Yes, the audio will be archived on the web page that we've created in addition to the PowerPoints and other supplementary materials, including those Clearinghouse Review articles. You received a link to that page in your reminder yesterday, and you'll receive it again probably tomorrow in a follow-up email. So that material will be available. For people who still have questions that didn't get answered, on our Facebook page, we've created, in the discussion tab, there's a place where you can post those. The link to that will also be on the web page. So if anyone wants to continue this discussion, you can post your questions there, either through the link on the webinar web page or just go to Facebook and search Schreiber Center and then discussions. And we will monitor that and relay the questions, if you have additional ones, to the presenters, and hopefully prompt a further discussion on that page. So that's it. Thanks very much for joining us. Thanks especially to the panelists for taking the time to share their experiences and lessons learned and so forth. And we appreciate your interest, and we will hope to be continuing this discussion. Thanks, everybody.